Oh, would you look at that? Once again, it's remake time. This time, it's my top 15 favorite bosses. I had a good selection last time, but I've faced a lot more great bosses since then. So you knew it had to have been coming at some point. Rules are same as last time. One per franchise, only games I've played, and no final bosses. Am I remaking the final bosses list? I'm not sure yet, but I figured I would keep the rule in place to make things easier on myself. Now with all that said, let's begin. Like I said in my last video, Pony Island is a game I feel is alright, but not that great. The one part that really stood out to me though is the fight with Asmodeus.exe. I put fight in quotes because there isn't really any fighting going on. All you have to do is answer his questions. The catch is that he'll pull just about every trick imaginable to trip you up. Some of these are simple misdirects, but others are insane. The most notable ones are him pretending to crash the game just to make you forget a sequence of numbers, and using one of your Steam friends as a sock puppet to make it look like they're contacting you just to distract you from his instructions. The fight itself is rather short, but damn is it memorable. Honestly, Asmodeus seems to me like the modern day equivalent of Psycho Mantis. Psychonauts isn't exactly a game you come to for the bosses. They're not bad, but they're far from the highlight of the game. Although some of them do have clever elements, like Kochamara yelling out the names of his attacks Destroy Man style, and Jasper literally shooting insults at you. My personal favorite though is Odio. In Black Velvetopia, the entire level revolves around avoiding this thing, so you better believe it's satisfying to finally fight back. The fight revolves around using confusion grenades to stun Odio, and then using telekinesis to jam a bunch of metal poles into his back. Gee, I wonder why there are so many protests against bullfighting. It seems like such a lovely sport. What really gets this fight on this list, however, is the second phase and how well it ties into the level's story. You see, the goal of Black Velvetopia is to help Edgar build a tower to reach Lampita, his former lover who left him for Dingo, the bullfighter. Except they aren't real. Dingo and Lampita are just constructs in Edgar's mind, recreating his old high school drama. Odio, on the other hand, is revealed to be Edgar in an enraged state, unable to let go of the past. After all, Odio literally translates to the hatred. Halfway through the fight, the target switches to Dingo. You have to attack him in the same way you damaged Edgar, while also making sure he doesn't kill Odio. So yeah, this part of the fight is technically an escort mission. Don't worry though, it's actually good. Unlike a certain other escort mission in this game, it offers just the right amount of challenge to make it interesting without it being too frustrating. The best part of the fight though is the ending, because it's so satisfying to see Edgar finally let go.
Edgar, look at them. They're too pathetic to hurt you anymore. Can't you just let it go?
How embarrassing. I can't believe I was hung up for so long over these losers.
Punch-Out is essentially a game that's nothing but bosses, so it only makes sense that one of them would make the list. All of them are memorable in their own ways, but it was pretty easy for me to pick. Aran Ryan. More specifically, his title defense fight. So, what separates Ryan from the other boxers? Very simply, the dude's a friggin' lunatic. Sure, the other boxers are definitely eccentric, but this guy's absolutely insane. Just from the menu screen, you can tell this dude has no self-control, and his mannerisms throughout the fight, especially his victory animations, are nothing short of hilarious. Also, some of his moves are illegal. Sure, I doubt it's okay for Great Tiger to use magic, or for King Hippo to strap a manhole cover to his stomach, but Aran Ryan launches himself off the ropes, and in the title defense fight, literally brings a weapon into the ring. He swings his little glove rope around like a whip, and tries to damage you on his way down, so you can't even relax when you've depleted his health. The most unique part of this fight, though, is the way you have to damage him. You see, in the other fights, you're encouraged to dodge attacks and then attack in the short opening afterwards. Aran Ryan doesn't give you that opening. If you want to damage him, you have to stay in place and hit him before his attacks can land. Quite the change of pace. Batman Arkham City is a game with a lot of good boss. Okay, I'll just cut the crap. You already know I'm about to talk about Mr. Freeze. Sure, Raish looked cool and Clayface was fun even if he was a bit easy, but Mr. Freeze is the boss from this game that everyone remembers. For a good reason too. Mr. Freeze has an incredibly creative gimmick for his fight that I honestly wish more games would try. You see, there are many different ways to damage Freeze in this fight. All of them are stealth related, as he's far too powerful to attack head on. You can attack from a window, zip line into him, use magnets to immobilize him, plenty of stuff. The catch is that Mr. Freeze is really smart. It's not like he's a complex learning AI that tracks your every move or anything, but he does do something really cool. Whenever you attack him, he'll remember that attack, and it won't work on him again. In other words, the boss forces you to mix up your strategy when fighting him. It never feels too restrictive either, as you only need to damage him 5 times, and there are 12 ways to do so, allowing for some fun experimentation. It's a battle of brain power just as much as it is a test of skill. Despite what some might expect, Spongebob Battle for Bikini Bottom is a really solid 3D platformer. One aspect of the game I'm not sure how to feel about though is the bosses. On one hand, there aren't really that many of them. On the flip side though, all of the major bosses are pretty good. Case in point, Robot Patrick. I think the most interesting part of Robot Patrick is the way the fight changes with each phase. While Robot Patrick gains new attacks as the fight progresses, his fighting style remains largely the same. What sets the phases apart is the way the environment changes. When it starts off, the battlefield is normal. All you have to do is wait for Robot Patrick to spin around until he gets dizzy and falls down. Then, you use the opening to attack the kick me sign on his back, which is a hilariously fitting way to damage him. The second phase is where things get interesting. You play as Sandy and things progress as normal, but every time you hit Robot Patrick, he'll dump toxic sludge onto the battlefield, making it harder to get around. Luckily, crates fall from the sky, so you can just stand on one to hit him. Sandy's mobility makes this easily my favorite part of the fight. Finally, when the battlefield is full, Spongebob steps back in, but now, thanks to the sludge, you can't go up and hit Robot Patrick. Instead, you have to maneuver around the conveyor belts and use the bubble bowl to hit him. All of this adds up to a fun challenge that forces you to change up your fighting style a surprising amount with each phase. One thing that was a little disappointing in Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story is that there was never a proper fight against General Goomp, Sergeant Guy, and Corporal Paraplonk. After all, you get to take revenge on the Monty Moles with the Fawful Express, but never these 3. Luckily, we get a fight with them in Dream Team. I tend to really enjoy boss fights that are against multiple characters with unique abilities. The Elite Trio is one of those fights, but there's a big difference here. Rather than picking them off one by one, you have to defeat all of them at the same time, because if you don't, they'll just revive each other. That sounds really annoying, but it's not like they come back with full health, although they do heal each other constantly. Like I said before, each of them have their own attacks, and they're all satisfying to counter. General Goomp sends a horde of Goombas after you, but you can send them charging right back at him. Corporal Paraplonk can start bouncing between 2 blocks, and you can send him flying into his friends. Finally, Sergeant Guy can disguise the Goombas as clones of himself and send them after you with hammers, and can also load a bonsai bill into his cannon to launch at you. Finally, there's an attack where Sergeant Guy comes charging at you with a massive bomb, and General Goomp sends his Goombas after you to slow you down. And if they don't catch up to you, all 3 of them get blown up. All of this makes for a really fun fight, and almost makes me feel bad that they get demoted for losing. Almost. Who here's played Wario Master of Disguise? Yeah, I know, not that many people. It really is a good game though. One of my favorites on the DS, as well as the subject of my very first video game countdown. Seriously, if you want to see how bad a defossilizer video can get, that one's for you. What I'm getting at here is that video was about the game's bosses, and I'm about to talk about number 1, Carpaccio. Yes, all the characters in the game are named after Italian food. Your first fight with Carpaccio is pretty early in the game, where he turns into this big floating head thing. Look, it's a Wario game, don't question it. The point is, he's smart enough to realize that he can't fight you head on, no pun intended. So instead, he challenges Wario to a race. If Wario wins, he gets another Wish Stone piece. If Carpaccio wins, Wario has to give up all of his Wish Stone pieces. There's a catch here though. Carpaccio's track is an ordinary racetrack, while Wario's is an insane obstacle course that you need to use all of your disguises to get through. So not only do you need to power through this obstacle course, but you also need to do it as quickly as you can. But that's not even enough. After all, if Carpaccio's cheating, why can't you? If you want a chance at winning, you need to use Arty Wario to put blocks in Carpaccio's path so you can buy yourself enough time. I also love the boss theme here. It was cool in the first fight, but it's even better here given how fast-paced it is. What else can I say but Purple Wind, silent but deadly? Yes, that is seriously Wario's catchphrase in this game. In the last version of this list, I had Orochi as the representative from Okami. However, while I still do really like that fight, having to fight him 3 times does take some of the fun away. Also, while Orochi is my favorite boss in the game story-wise, aside from maybe Yami, Lechku and Nechku is my favorite fight gameplay-wise. Again, aside from Yami. To start with, just look at the designs of the bosses. Granted, Okami has a lot of cool looking enemy designs, but gold and silver clockwork owl magicians is a particularly creative idea. I'd be lying if I said the battlefield wasn't also awesome. That stormy sky really does create a great atmosphere. The strategy for beating these guys is actually quite simple. They have plenty of attacks that you counter with your various brush techniques. Once you've countered enough of them, they'll start malfunctioning and you can launch Oki at them, knocking them out of the sky so you can attack. What makes this fight really fun are 2 things. For starters, you have 2 targets you're alternating between rather than just one you need to keep track of. And second, you use a wide variety of brush techniques in this fight, while most fights only had you using 1 or 2 of them. It makes sense why they're using such a great variety right now. One, it was kind of the theme of the temple beforehand, and secondly, this is the first boss fight where you have all 13 brush techniques. Overall, this fight is epic, a lot of fun, and a great boss to have right before the final area. What really makes the bosses in Undertale stand out is the way they change up the gameplay from the typical bullet hell mechanics. Papyrus essentially turns the game into a platformer. Undyne forces you to stay in place and has her attacks play out almost like a rhythm game. And then there's Mettaton. The fight with Mettaton EX has several gimmicks that make it memorable. To start with, there's the fact that Mettaton is an entertainer, so the fight with him is being broadcast all over the underground. As a result, every action you take affects the show's ratings in some way, and the goal is to get them up to 1,000. The other thing that makes this fight unique is the way you defend against his attacks. You deal with Mettaton's incredibly stylish attacks by shooting them. That's right, after spending the whole game playing pacifist, you finally get to fight back without it affecting your karma. Even when Mettaton's limbs start falling off, it still counts as the pacifist route. The story behind this fight is also pretty interesting. Most of the characters you fight want your soul so they can give it to Asgore so he can destroy the barrier. Mettaton, on the other hand, is different. He's convinced Asgore will destroy all of humanity if given the chance, so instead, he just wants to escape on his own. That way, he can become an entertainer on the surface. However, once the calls from his fans start pouring in, he realizes he can't abandon them and opts to stay underground. And all that's without even mentioning how he turned on Alphys because he didn't want to be part of her creepy stalker games. But that's an entirely different conversation. Overall, Mettaton had a very commanding personality, and this fight more than did him justice. there's an interesting gimmick to all of Epic Mickey's bosses. That gimmick is the fact that you have the option to either redeem or defeat them. Sounds interesting, right? Well, the gameplay of the fights doesn't really change that much based on your choices to redeem or defeat them. Usually, it's just the difference between using paint or thinner. There is one massive exception to this though, Captain Hook. Captain Hook is essentially 2 fights rolled into one, both of which are fun. To start with, if you want to defeat Hook, you have 2 options, both of which involve fighting him on the deck. You avoid his attacks, thin out his armor, and then spin him along one of the several tracks laid out for you. You can change where the tracks lead, and there are several things you can do with them. You can lead Hook into a wall to do extra damage, or you can lead him into one of these gear things to activate a mechanism. The fight ends either when Hook has taken so much of a beating that he falls apart, or, much more satisfyingly, when you get him to walk the plank. What's even better though is the path to redeeming Hook. To do that, you have to climb up through the ship's sails and use both paint and thinner to manipulate the platforms to your advantage. Meanwhile, Hook will be chasing after you, shooting thinner at you, and messing with the platforms. When you get to the top, you can free the sprite Hook has trapped there, and Pete Pan will come in to fight Hook for you in a pretty entertaining fight scene. Overall, Captain Hook is a lot of fun regardless of how you choose to fight him. Okay, you knew I had to have a representative from Cuphead on here, and let me tell you, picking one was probably the hardest part of making this list. For those of you who don't know, I was originally planning on making top 10 Cuphead bosses, but I scrapped the idea because I wasn't sure how I'd rank them. So I decided to go back to Cuphead and refight every boss to see which one was my favorite, and a good deal of my opinions changed. Cagney Carnation and Baroness von Bonbon were better than I remembered. Rumor Honeybottoms and Beppy the Clown were worse than I remembered, and Grim Matchstick still sucks. Captain Brinybeard was close to being my pick, but in the end, I decided to go with the Phantom Express. To start with, this fight has a pretty unique gimmick to it. You're riding on a cart outside of the Phantom Express, and you parry the sides of the cart to move it. There's just one problem. Enemies are constantly dropping items on the sides of the cart to move it, screwing you over. Luckily, all of these items can be parried, so you'll be building up your super meter quite a bit. What I really like about this fight is how much it feels like an adventure. You start at the back of the train, and with each phase you move further up until you get to the front and fight the train itself. Despite the fact it technically isn't that fast compared to the other fights, this fight feels really fast-paced. Each phase has a good balance of avoiding the attacks while also making sure your cart is in the right place. In fact, most of the time those things go hand in hand. Plus, this fight makes more use out of parrying than any other fight in the game, which I can appreciate. So yeah, Phantom Express is my favorite boss in Cuphead. I can't believe I almost gave this spot to King Dice. A Hat in Time does a really good job with its bosses. It seems strange, because the game isn't really that combat heavy, but the bosses are really fun and satisfying. The attacks are fun to avoid, and landing hits just feels so satisfying for some reason. Now, you all probably think you have me figured out. I'm going to talk about the Snatcher, right? Nope. Don't get me wrong, Snatcher is a good fight, but he's not my favorite. That title would go to DJ Grooves. The first thing to note about this fight is the gimmick that leads up to it. In Chapter 2, Battle of the Birds, the conductor and DJ Grooves are competing to win a film award, and your performance in their levels determines the winner. I'm explaining this now because you fight the winner as the chapter's boss. For the sake of convenience, I'm going to be talking about this fight assuming DJ Grooves won, because that's what happened in my playthrough. It's the same exact fight, so you can literally just flip the names around and get the opposite scenario. DJ Grooves has a ton of flashy attacks, many of which are from one of the movies. From falling stage lights and disco balls, to ramming a bunch of cars into you, to shooting buzzsaws, to turning off the lights and trying to stab you with the knife from the murder mystery. things really get heated halfway through the fight. Grooves sits you down for a little heart-to-heart and begs you to let him keep the timepiece so he can go back and undo all of his losses. When you refuse, he straps the bomb from the conductor's train to you. Luckily, the conductor shows up to defuse it in a pretty hilarious fashion. Then, Grooves pulls out the big guns. He brings in the parade and has them follow you for the rest of the fight. Luckily for you though, the fight's almost over. This all sounds great, but this isn't actually the fight that made the list. I'm putting the Death Wish version at this spot. It's the same fight, but all of the attacks are beefed up, and instead of fighting the conductor or DJ Grooves, you're fighting the conductor and DJ Grooves, doubling the targets and the attacks you have to avoid. Good luck, you're gonna need it. Make way for the most easily predictable entry on this list. Let me explain. Much like Cuphead, No More Heroes was a shoo-in for this list. However, unlike Cuphead, there is a list of my favorite No More Heroes bosses, and my number one hasn't changed. When you imagine someone living underneath a baseball stadium, what would you picture? How about a deranged 20-something in a kink outfit batting around gimps for fun and living off a diet of nothing but beer? You probably imagine someone with a similar level of sanity, but I doubt you pictured that specifically. Yeah, Bad Girl is absolutely nuts, even by No More Heroes standards. Maybe she's a bit more sane than Destroy Man, but that's a pretty low bar. What makes her fight so much fun is the fact that it reflects her insanity so well. Despite the fact that her only weapon is a baseball bat, she manages to hold her own against your beam katana that slices through people on a regular basis. One of her main attacks is batting gimps at you that serve both as projectiles and as enemies. Also, halfway through the fight, she lights her bat on fire, just to make things even more dangerous. And then there's the matter of her most infamous move, crying. If she's crying with both her hands up to her face, it's an opening. But if she has one arm to her side, it's a trap. An instant kill trap. I also love the ending to this fight. Even though Bad Girl's been impaled, she's still desperately trying to kill Travis. I know that Bad Girl was brought back from the dead in Travis Strikes Again, and that makes me even more excited for No More Heroes 3. Part of me is excited by the idea of getting to play as her, but another part of me's worried it might turn out like Shinobu in No More Heroes 2. Hopefully, Suda learned his lesson this time. If there's one video game character that was designed to be hateable in all the best ways, I would say it's Bertrand from Infamous 2. This guy is as despicable as you can get, and he only gets worse as the game progresses. They make it beyond satisfying whenever you manage to chip away at his influence even a little bit, so you can imagine how awesome it feels when you finally take him down for good. You see, Bertrand may look like a feeble old man, but he has the ability to turn into this thing. So this isn't just a one-on-one between Cole and Bertrand. Just about everyone you've met on your adventure helps out. The mission starts with Cole confronting Bertrand on his helipad and learning what his true plan was. Also, Cole gets in a pretty good line.
I finally get it. Oh, you thought the ray sphere was gonna turn you into some sort of shiny superhuman. But instead it turned you into a 50-foot maggot.
Then, the fight starts. First, you have to hop on Zeke's truck to lure Bertrand to the ambush, without letting him destroy the truck in the process. Then, you can finally start beating up on him. Things are pretty standard at this point, but they're still fun. You wait for Bertrand to reveal his weak points while fighting off the swamp creatures he spawns. Then, about halfway through the fight, Cole jumps onto a helicopter to lure Bertrand into position, so the resistance can fire missiles at him. But some of the missiles don't detonate, so you have to blow them up yourself. Then, the fight proceeds as normal once again until Bertrand keels over and dies. I think the most satisfying part of the fight are the reactions to it afterwards. You see, Infamous 2 is a game filled to the brim with tough moral decisions that are always bound to leave someone unhappy. With Bertrand, though, there's no ambiguity. Absolutely everyone is on your side. For once, there's no question, this was obviously the right thing to do. South Park: The Fractured But Whole has a ton of great bosses. The best of them, though, would have to be the final boss. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't I say no final bosses? Well, yes, but here's the thing. Mitch Connor 2.0 is the actual final boss, and it's a crappy, underwhelming fight. The fight before it, on the other hand, is awesome and functions much more like a final boss. So in other words, while number 1 feels like a final boss, it technically isn't. Now, the Stick of Truth had an awesome concept for a final boss, having you go up against Kenny. You know, the character who's known for being immortal. How could they top that? Simple, by having you fight yourself from the first game. That's right, they went there. The fight with the king is an all-out war. It starts off simply enough. You and your party members face off against the king. However, things start to get crazy once you've weakened him just a little bit. He retreats and sends in Clyde and a couple of regular enemies to finish you off. For the next 3 phases, he sends in his reinforcements. First Clyde, then Craig, then Kyle. And with each one, your party switches. So you get to use just about all of your party members in this fight. Also, there's some pretty hilarious dialogue going on the whole way through. The best part, though, is when all the reinforcements have been defeated. Butters arrives, everyone, and you get your selected party members back. The final phase of the fight has you facing off against the king as well as all of his servants. Remember when I said I liked boss fights against several characters with unique abilities? Well, one of the big reasons for that is it forces you to assess who the biggest threat is, then pick them off. Sure, the fight automatically ends when the king is defeated, but given how much health he has, he's not going down first. Each of his servants bring a different threat to the table. Clyde gives everyone shields, Craig spawns clones of himself, Kyle can hit everyone in the party regardless of where he is, and Butters hits you with his hammer. I assumed he could heal the party, but I guess not. The biggest threat, though, is the king. His attacks are absolutely devastating, so you want to make sure he gets as few opportunities to use them as possible. Everything about this fight is awesome. From having to take down everyone in the king's court, to getting to use everyone in your party, to the fact that, you know, you're fighting your past self. I am Defawfalizer, and be sure to check out this collab I was in. It's about the Mario RPGs. I really hope it's out by the time you're seeing this, otherwise this is gonna be pretty awkward.